It would seem everything with Prince Harry and his charity Sentebale has completely broken down. You know what has hit the fan. This is a big deal. A few days ago, Prince Harry announced to the press in true dramatic form that he was stepping down as patron. And this is not only a rather serious situation because lawsuits have been filed and whatnot, but also really bad press for Harry. When Harry announced that he was stepping down, he sent the statement to the press, and the statement was very, very pointed. He clearly targeted the chairwoman of Sentebale, Dr. Sophie Chandauka. She is a lawyer and very successful. She has held many high-level positions in really big companies, including Meta. And Sophie has been with Sentebale for many years. So it's a little bit strange to have this big of a reaction and this much stuff coming out all of a sudden, kind of feeling like it's out of nowhere. But Harry's statement was certainly crafted to manipulate this narrative in a way that made Sophie look like the problem. And Harry has clearly thrown his weight around behind the scenes, trying to convince people to step down and to target Sophie as the problem here. So while we don't know the full story here just yet, what we do know is before Harry stepped down way back at the beginning of March, Sophie reported the charity because she found some wrongdoings and was having some issues with how the charity was being run, and she filed a lawsuit about Harry's treatment of her and the bullying and whatnot that had been going on behind the scenes. So it would appear that Harry stepping down and issuing this statement to the press was a reaction to that lawsuit and reporting Sentebale to the charity commission who oversees charities to make sure that they are not being corrupt. Which makes Harry's statement all the more suspicious with how much he's targeting Sophie. Why be so defensive, and why step down and try to attack the person who's reporting the charity for maybe not being, maybe needing some more regulation or maybe needing some sort of a review? For Harry to respond in this manner rather than supporting the review or wanting to make sure that things get back on track because, you wouldn't want a charity not being responsible with its funds, things like that. Instead of those things, Harry has reacted by attacking the whistleblower in the situation of Sophie, which makes Harry look more guilty than if he would have just stayed out of it altogether or just not done anything, or just made a neutral stepping down statement that didn't involve attacking Sophie or trying to manipulate the narrative of making her look like the bad guy in the situation. But I want to be clear. At this point, there's not enough information out there for anybody to pass judgment and say that 100% who was at fault here or who has done things wrong or who hasn't. But we do have a bit of a track record to go off of, to start making some early predictions about who might actually be at fault. And it's pretty clear the public opinion at this point is that Harry is clearly much more likely to be the problem than Dr. Sophie Chandauka. She was working with Sentebale for a long time before she was elected to become chairwoman. And that is a position that you are appointed to. She was elected by other people working with Sentebale, and the trustees wanted her to be chairwoman, or at least some people wanted her to be chairwoman. So she wouldn't have been given that position if people didn't get along with her and think she was doing a good job in her participation prior to that for many, many years. Additionally, she has had a lot of really high-powered jobs, so clearly she is quite competent and a high-performing individual when it comes to career spaces. So it would be kind of illogical to assume that she came in here after years of a good track record and great experience as a lawyer and started doing shady stuff. That would be kind of unreasonable to assume. Harry, on the other hand, has a track record of being sort of irresponsible with charities and his just general reputation, along with Meghan, of being difficult to work with, billing a lot of their unnecessary expenses to charities. We're going to get more into that in a minute. But Harry's reputation isn't as glowing as Sophie's. And on top of it, people know the history with Meghan and Harry and their involvement in things and stuff souring and them being quite entitled and difficult to work with. So it would be safe to assume at this point that it is more likely that Harry is trying to manipulate the media against Sophie to try to turn the tides of public opinion against her in a desperate bid to escape responsibility for any wrongdoing that he did do while he was with Sentebale and involved in their operations. That is a more logical place to start in terms of assumptions than assuming Sophie actually did anything wrong besides upsetting Harry and Meghan, which, as we all know, is far too easy to do. Recently, Dr. Sophie spoke out and revealed just why the relationship between Harry and Sophie and Sentebale, and kind of including this fringe person who's not actually directly involved, of Meghan, started to sour. It all began and tracks back to the Meg at this polo match. We covered this. I will try to link the video if I can find it. But Meghan made a complete and utter fool of herself here at this charity polo match that Harry and his team, I think they won for Sentebale. And so they were all up there taking pictures. And Meghan was there presenting the trophy sort of awkwardly in her too high heels, almost falling down at one point, walking super strange, as you can see. And then she bossed Sophie around and told Sophie not to stand right next to Harry, but to stand on the other side. And it was just super awkward and super weird. Bossing people around in a picture is never going to be a good look no matter who you are, but it's especially a bad look for Meghan with the reputation that she has for being unnecessarily bossy and controlling of those around her. Anyway, at the time, we all just marveled at the ridiculousness of Meghan and of course felt bad for Sophie that she was put in this awkward situation only because Meghan didn't know how to behave. It was not Sophie's fault at all, and it was clear that Meghan was being ridiculous. So at the time, that's all anybody knew about. That Meghan, once again, did something silly and foolish. She's made a fool of herself at polo matches many a time. We thought that was it. We thought that was the full story. Apparently not. Now we know that Meghan pulled the same tactics that she pulled when she was with the royal family, when she was working with the palace, that didn't work then and aren't working now. Let me explain. In true narcissistic form, Meghan Markle did not learn from her mistakes in the slightest. She did not learn from burning bridges. No, she's just continued it and is executing the same tactics again, which, as we know, people who are really high in narcissism or who are quite toxic tend to do that. They tend to have a hard time learning from their mistakes because they always think everything is everybody else's fault. So before we get into the details of exactly what went down here and how this whole thing started, I would like to point out that this, once again, is more evidence that Harry and Meghan do pay attention to the press. They say repeatedly that they really don't, or that someone else tells them if there's something they need to know about, but that they themselves don't stoop down and read the press. But it's clear that they do, because the only way for this story to have unfolded the way that it did would be for Meghan and Harry to have read the press and seen the backlash for Meghan's actions of bossing Sophie around on the polo stage, creating an awkward situation for everybody. Because there was a lot of press about it, kind of making fun of how Meghan behaved because it's not a socially appropriate way to behave, and also criticizing her for doing that and just like social etiquette, pointing out that that's not the right way to behave, and look, Meghan's being bossy again. But also people just saying, yeah, this was kind of weird and awkward, and coming from a neutral place. News stories of just like, yeah, this happened and it was kind of weird for everybody, and this is what Meghan did, and this is how it looks. And then in the comments, people saying, yeah, that's ridiculous and shame on Meghan. So she was being criticized both in some media, but also it was just being reported on in some media. My point is that largely Meghan and Harry get upset about things that are reported just simply as fact and are neutral and are not even particularly critical of her. she gets mad about it even when it's not criticized. You've got to know your role. Just as an aside, don't go out of bounds. If you're not the organizer, don't boss people around. Only cringe will result from it. But anyway, after they saw this bad press, what happened next was that they asked Sophie to put out a statement saying that Harry and Meghan were not mean to her and that she was not upset or offended at Meghan's actions at the polo event, on stage in particular with the trophy. So that's why I point out the only way for that to have happened would be for Meghan and Harry to have seen the press coverage, seen the comments, seen people criticizing Meghan's nonsense. If they hadn't seen it, they wouldn't have known it was a thing, and they wouldn't be asking Sophie to put out a statement about it, because that wouldn't make any sense. The only way for this to make sense is that Harry and Meghan do pay attention to the press. And because of that, they were perhaps embarrassed, perhaps just simply didn't like the coverage, and Meghan and Harry thought that they could squash that media coverage by forcing Sophie to put out a statement that said she wasn't offended or that Meghan and Harry were not mean to her on that day. How ridiculous is that? You literally cannot make it up. That is an insane thing to ask of a professional, somebody who you have a professional relationship with, who was probably a little bit offended and embarrassed at Meghan's incessant bossing her around the stage as a grown woman. In general, this is just an insane request or thing to be concerned about as an adult, especially in this situation and with this dynamic of somebody who's sort of like a coworker with Harry, sort of akin to a middle school level, a junior high level of concern and request. It's that trivial of a thing. From a 40-year-old pair of idiots to someone with a real job in a professional position. In what universe would that even make sense for Sophie to be like, yeah, no, Meghan wasn't mean to me here? How does that make any sense? It's incredibly bizarre, very, very strange, and just a generally out of bounds idea for Harry and Meghan to think that it was appropriate to even raise this issue with Dr. Sophie as something that she should dedicate any degree of time, resources, or brain space to makes no sense. According to reports, Sophie Chandauka, the boss of Prince Harry's charity Sentebale, fell out with Harry and Meghan after she refused a request by the couple to tell the media that Markle hadn't been mean to her at a charity polo match. Harry quit the charity in a blaze of recriminations this week. The awkward encounter at the Sentebale polo match has been shared thousands of times on social media in recent days and previously went semi-viral. I mean, I don't know that anything with Harry and Meghan really goes viral any longer, but it went semi-viral. It went viral within the community of royal watchers, that's for sure. Damningly, it shows Meghan Markle telling Chandauka, the CEO of the charity and a globally respected lawyer who has worked in-house for Meta and JP Morgan, among others, to move away from Harry during photographs. She is then forced to duck under the trophy to the place of Markle's choosing so that only Markle would be pictured by Harry's side. And remember, at the time we discussed maybe Meghan was a little bit jealous of Sophie, or maybe it was just some weird control thing. We didn't really know why it happened, but it was bizarre, and no matter the reason, even if Meghan had a perfectly valid reason or thought, well, the picture would look better if us three women are off to the side, it doesn't matter. It wasn't a good look to be bossing people around like that, and forcing Sophie to sort of awkwardly comply created a negative situation for everybody, and if you have any degree of compassion and social normalcy, you won't put other people in those positions, and you would avoid getting yourself into those positions, so more evidence of narcissism in that case, because only those super high in narcissism would do such a thing. Moving on. The Daily Telegraph on Saturday cited a well-placed but anonymous source as saying, ultimately it comes down to that polo match and the awkward moment with Markle moving her out of the way. Harry then demanded that she make a statement to the press basically saying Meghan wasn't mean to me, and she refused to do that, rightly so. We'll get to that next. The account will do little to rehabilitate Markle's image of being a nightmare boss and bully and bossy in a negative way. It would be easy to dismiss the claims were it not for the fact that Chandauka gave an astonishing on-the-record interview to Financial Times saying almost the same thing. The Financial Times said that Chandauka was asked by Harry to defend Markle in the media, and she replied, "I said no, we're not setting a precedent by which we become an extension of the Sussex PR machine." Good. Smart. Duh. Sophie has business knowledge. She has the smarts for this sort of a thing. That is a very skilled and logical position to take. And that is what any PR expert would recommend as well. You can't just infiltrate every organization that you're loosely connected to and try to control narratives and manipulate them into being part of your personal brand. That is ridiculous. And that's what Harry and Meghan want. And this brings me back to their days with the royal family. And this is why I say this is proof that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are incapable of learning anything and are just continuing their same tactics that they used to do when they were working royals. Very briefly, this is the exact same problem that they had with the palace. When they were with the royal family, they constantly asked the palace to release counter-narratives or statements that were defending Meghan Markle against little things. They wanted them to come out and shut down certain stories or put out different versions of stories or be like, no, that's not true, or that's not how it happened, or put out good stories about Meghan Markle on purpose, even good spins on things. Like, they were constantly nagging the PR people, the palace PR people, to basically push out different narratives, different stories, different image, if you will, of Meghan than what was naturally occurring in the press. But the problem is that it was over really trivial, really, really little things. And it was often only because they didn't like the fact that the opinion was against them. And so even articles that had no degree of opinion in them at all and were just a journalist reporting on facts tended to upset Harry and Meghan because people didn't react to them well. And that put the palace in a tight spot. There really wasn't anything that they could do. They really can't put out some sort of counter-narrative or statement against reports of something real that happened. It's just not the done thing. It's not a smart move, and it doesn't make any sense. And Harry and Meghan failed. Instead of taking the criticism and learning from it or making changes, they simply wanted to be defended over silly things like outfits, etiquette fails, and other personal subject matters of dramas of who was upset before a wedding, things like that. Harry and Meghan wanted those types of trivial narratives to be changed in the media and were wanting the monarchy to stoop to the level of basically petty gossip or silly trivial things like outfits. They wanted the palace to stoop to that level, to make statements about it. Rather than dedicating their time to real issues and important things, they wanted that to be the result. They wanted, no, full stop, everybody stop, put out a statement saying that the palace is happy with the outfits Meghan chose, put out a statement that nobody was upset at Meghan Markle, and put out a statement that Meghan didn't make Catherine cry. How foolish and ridiculous. So instead of taking their cues from public opinion and press of like, gee, I'm maybe doing something wrong here, I should learn a little bit or change my approach or change my tactics and do a little bit better to try to get better press first, maybe I should try that first before I ask people to come out and defend me or shut down narratives or stories or things like that. Maybe I should try to do a better job. Instead of that, they just went straight to, no, this can't be, you need to fix it. It would have undermined the monarchy to engage in such things, but perhaps more importantly, it would lead people to question why would the palace be wasting taxpayer money by paying staff to spend their time to put out stories that don't matter about clothing or drama behind the scenes of a wedding? Like, why would you be dedicating resources to that? That would not be wise at all. So the palace made the right choice there. And we have the same type of dynamic here with Sophie and Sentebale. It wouldn't be wise for a charitable organization to appear that they are dedicating time and resources, paying people hours to spend crafting narratives or putting out statements that are over something silly that doesn't matter. Even if Sophie weren't offended, or even if she was, it's not something to dedicate professional resources and use your professional capacities to discuss on the public stage. That's just not how things work. And so we see this similar dynamic at play now. Why would the chairwoman of Sentebale, the CEO of this charitable organization that's pretty well known, why would she, a professional, stoop to engage in gossip narratives? Why should she allocate any resources, time, staff, or money to such matters? It makes no sense. It would be an irresponsible use of her position. And so we have the same issue here with Sentebale that we saw unfold with the monarchy. And when Harry and Meghan didn't get their way, they stomped their feet, they sowed discord, and they left. It didn't work out well when they did that with the royal family. I've always said that exit was a huge bluff. That Megxit was a huge bluff. They literally thought that they could force the royal family to renegotiate and give them their way to get them back as working royals. And I don't see it working out well here with Sentebale because Sophie has filed lawsuits. Therefore, her case, her concerns evidently have merit, as she said, on the basis of bad treatment, but also potentially irresponsible use of funds. It's long been rumored and known in some spaces that Harry and Meghan bill excessively to all the charities and all the things that they do that they claim to support. So riddle me this. How is it supporting a charity to bill them just for showing up? How is it helping to take some percentage of that money that could be used for doing good, helping people or animals or causes of some kind, that could be donated out and pushed out into the world to do good with? Taking some of that money instead and giving it to Harry and Meghan for things like private flights, excessive convoys, unnecessary security, outfits, and more. How does that make sense, especially when the people in question, Harry and Meghan, are multimillionaires and can easily afford such things themselves? They can afford their own first-class accommodations, they can afford their own security, they can afford to get themselves there, and they can afford their own clothing to wear while working for a charity or doing a press junket for a few hours for a charity. They can afford it. So them billing it to the charity is already questionable ethics on Harry and Meghan's part. And the charity paying for it is kind of questionable as well, or really questionable. They could just refuse. But a lot of charities, when they have somebody on the board or as a patron or the trustees and whatnot, they have established relationships. They all know each other. They don't want to say no. Prince Harry is probably one of the most recognizable faces of Sentebale. For most people, he's one of two most recognizable ambassadors to the charity. And so they may have felt in a tight spot that they couldn't risk upsetting him to the degree of saying no to his excessive demands for reimbursement for his expenses or to just pay for his expenses straight out. They might have felt like they were in a tight spot and couldn't really say no, or they might have felt it was worth it, and perhaps Sophie disagreed. But it doesn't matter. This coming out will fall back as a negative thing on Harry and Meghan, that they, who can afford to show up for free, would bill the charity to show up. That is not going to look good for Harry and Meghan, should that be the case. And it sounds like, by most accounts so far, that is the case. And since Sophie's lawsuit was accepted to be heard, that means there is merit to this. So clearly there has been some degree of wrongdoing, and Sophie is claiming that she has suffered bullying at the hands of Harry and Meghan because of all of this. So her refusal to essentially defend Meghan Markle makes sense. It makes 100% sense. She was in the right. Whether Sophie wanted to do it or not, even if she was like, well, I would love to because I get it and I'm not actually pissed about it, I don't really care, it's not a good use of my time. And it's not a good use of resources and wouldn't reflect positively on the charity to dedicate resources to this. So even saying that, even though it was the right choice to not do it, sparked a vendetta in Harry and Meghan, and we know how vindictive they can be. They are willing to ruthlessly lie and throw their weight around, and it just simply wasn't an acceptable request of Sophie, and it was even more inappropriate to be angry and vindictive that she refused to do it. And it sounds like since she said no, since then, Harry and Meghan have been working hard to diligently paint Sophie as the bad guy and the problem in the situation and come after her. If we were to take her lawsuits and her statements and her reports at face value, then logically, what she's saying is that they launched basically a retaliation campaign against her for saying no to this simple, silly request. We're going to talk a little bit more about what Sophie said in her interview and about Harry's statement in an upcoming video in part 2, so be sure you're subscribed so you do not miss it. Thank you for joining me for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Have a happy day, everybody. Bye.